Hello, guys. Thanks for joining this session. We will start in a few seconds. So at the very beginning, I'd like to thank Amen and the other guys in Microsoft Reactor team who helped arrange this session and make it possible. And the title of this session is about VSCode, a code editor, and language server. We will go through the technical details in the coming slides. So this is about me. My name is Lex Lee, and I'm the CEO and senior consultant at Lex Studio. I have more than 15 years of experience on Microsoft.NET platform and have been awarded Microsoft Most Valuable Professional since 2012. I often blog about Microsoft technologies, and you can also see me on sites like Stack Overflow. For business inquiries, you can write to my mailbox at support@lexstudio.com. Here is the agenda for today's session. We will go through the topics one by one. What is a language server and why you need it? How to create a new language server. We will go through the basics, how to define language grammar, how to define a parser, and finally build the language server upon that. After that, we will have a dedicated Q&A session. So in recent year, I became a VS Code active user. I use it daily on different kind of tasks. And I guess many of you do the same. When Microsoft, a very Windows-centric company, released this tiny little cross-platform utility in 2015, not many believed that it would become a huge success. But thanks to its elegant design and an active community behind, VS Code has become the most popular code editor on the planet. You can actually learn that from quite a lot of developer surveys. If you haven't installed VS Code on your machine, I suggest you go to code.visualstudio.com and try it out. The default VS Code installation on your machine actually contains only a limited set of features. But you can go to the VS Code marketplace and find tons of extensions out there to enrich the user experience. For example, only in the category of programming languages, now there are more than 4,000 extensions. No matter what kind of programming language you aim to use within Visual Studio, C#, Java, C++, Python, you can find actually the language extension for that language. You might wonder how a language server for VS Code works. And here I show you a diagram that illustrates the details. For this specific VS Code instance, it has two language extensions installed, one for HTML and the other for PHP. The language clients are written in TypeScript or JavaScript. They're running inside VS Code. They hook to VS Code extension API and respond to a lot of different events, such as editor open, closed, file modify, or saved. The language server component is a separate process which analyzes the source code files, generate an up-to-date code model in the memory, and provide program language specific services, such as auto-completion items. The language server and clients talk to each other quite often over a protocol called language server protocol. This protocol is a generic one built upon JSON RPC, so it allows us to implement the server component in any program language we like. Here, for example, the HTML language server is actually written using TypeScript, and the PHP one is written in PHP itself. Okay, next we will do a quick demo and go over the typical language services, such as auto-completion and error checking. Here I switch to one of my test machines, and we already have Visual Studio Code installed. Here I show you the insider build, which is releasing experiment features. So you can see from the extension tab that I have the Microsoft C and C++ extension installed. We will use that to editor some C program language file and enjoy the language server features it provides. You can see for this simple case, I have two C source files. The main file is hello.c, which contains a single function, the main function. And to enrich its functionality, it has an include statement point to test.h, a header file. And within that header file, I define another function called test2. Okay, so how does VSCode help us programming better with auto-completion? I just enter another line and try to type something. And you can see that when I type T in this line, VSCode automatically trigger auto-completion. It shows what are the possible options I can type further this line. From that, you can see test2 is a function we defined in the header file. And test is a variable, which is what I defined on line 4. And all the other items are actually constant or C language keywords that belongs to the C language itself. And behind the scene, there is a C language server running in the background, which analyzes both the header file as well as this hello.c file. It generates a code model in the memory, which tells, yeah, at this line 6, after we input a T, what can be the possible items that this developer would like to input. So that's how auto-completion works. And you can also notice if I type something miserable, yeah, VSCode actually highlight that line and indicate that this might be a problem, right? For example, here for this characters, it doesn't seem to be a reasonable C language item, so it shows an error. So that's the real-time error checking feature of VSCode. It's also something with the help of the language server in the background. Okay, that's so much. We just switch back. So to recap what we have learned so far, a language server is a console application. It can be written in any suitable language. And VS Code has many useful features, and many of them actually are empowered by the language server. So The language server is really a necessary part. I believe now you understand how powerful VS Code is with language extensions installed. So how can we easily implement such language extension? Even though a full feature language extension requires significant amount of work, such as the Microsoft C and C++ extension, we don't actually need to start from scratch for our own language extension. We will see why in a few minutes. As illustrated in this diagram, we can see the three critical parts of a language server process: LSP, the parser, and some glue code. The SLP implementation enables the communication between VS Code and the language server process. The language parser analyzes source code files and generates something called abstract syntax tree. The glue code connects SLP to the parser. Thanks to the open source community, now we actually have many SLP implementations out there that you can reuse. They come in a variety of program languages, so you rarely need to write your own. Then what about a parser? Or you might ask what exactly a parser is. So these diagrams show you the typical parsing process with a quite simple example. We will learn what is a parser from that. Assume that we have a text expression, 437 plus 734 in the source file. It consists of 7 characters. A component called lexer will perform lexical analysis, which go over the characters one by one and group them up into meaningful tokens. And for this example, it will generate 3 tokens, 2 numbers, 437, and another one is 734. We also have a mathematical operator, plus. So that's the 3 tokens. The other components called the parser will further organize the tokens into tree-shaped data structure. We call that abstract syntax tree. This data structure is quite suitable for further processing. So we try to understand the tree-shaped data structure in this way. At top, we get an expression entity, which represents different kind of mathematical expression. And for this special case, it maps to a sum of numbers. And for this sum, it comes from 2 numbers. So that's how we understand the tree. You might wonder how we write a parser since it's just a piece of code. Must we start from scratch, line by line? Usually you don't, because there are quite a lot of utilities that can speed up parser development. We have a special name for them, call them parser generators. And one of them is called Antl, A-N-T-L-R. We can use that tool to write a parser easily. So for Antl, the first step to develop your own parser is to write a grammar file with file extension .g4. That's for the grammar version 4. We defined how the programming language looks like, what are the building blocks, how a variable looks like, how methods looks like, how a type will look like. And after that, you need to verify whether you write a good enough grammar by testing it against many test files. You don't even need to write your own grammar file if you target a popular or well-known program language. You can go to this GitHub repo and find quite a lot of sample grammars for C, Java, C#, Python, and so on and so forth. Here is this code snip that captures from the GitHub repository, showing you how a grammar looks like for the C program language. Due to the technical, it's actually quite lengthy to explain how each line of the grammar file works. So we will skip here. Maybe next time we can do a dedicated session for that topic. And once we have a grammar file prepared or download from the internet, we can easily generate the parser code using the ento command line tool. Yeah, just a simple command, ento4 plus the grammar file, and it will automatically generate the code that you need for your language server. Since ento is a generic parser engine, it can generate target source code of your parser in many program languages. So for the same grammar file, we can generate either C# code or Java code or C++ code or Python code. So it's quite flexible here for you to define your parser. And alternatively, if you target a specific program language such as C#, you might try to use a C# specific tooling that will give you a better integration with the programming environment. For example, the C# ento tooling has quite excellent integration with MS Build. Okay, now we have the SLP implementation, and we also have the parser generated by ento. The remaining task is to write some glue code to hook the two up and build up a complete language server. So when VSCode sends a request for auto-completion, that request will contain the file name we open in VSCode, the line number, and the column number. That's where the cursor is. The language server protocol component receive and understand this request, and then it pass on to the glue code. The glue code will talk to the parser. Please pass this target file for me and let me know what are the building blocks inside that file. For example, what are the functions and their names. And then the glue code can easily generate auto-completion items and return them to VSCode. And then back in VSCode, we actually see a pop-up, a list of items, which we can then easily use to speed up our coding. And here we just recap for the three important parts of your language server: SLP, grammar parser, and the glue. You actually can reuse as much as you like and just write the necessary new code for the glue part. Here I provide you a list of references. You can go over the articles on VSCode official site, which talks more technical details on language extensions, language servers, and the protocol itself. I also provide you 2 GitHub repositories. The first one, ANSI-C-Ento, is a simple ANSI-C language server that built upon the existing C-Ento grammar file. You can check out its source code to understand the steps I described earlier in the slides. And the second repo is the VSCode ANSI-C extension. It's a demo extension just for the ANSI-based language server. Combining the 2, you can get some of the language server features running. Since it's only a sample project, you can only get auto-completion, not error checking yet. But I might update the repo to include that feature because it can be a good example for you to get started. If you have questions regarding those sample repos, please feel free to open new issues on GitHub, and I will try to answer them on GitHub. I do have some advice for you if you want to start your own language server. First, always start from a minimal set of features. Don't rush to a lot of features because that actually requires quite a lot of efforts. And second, please try to gradually add new features. Yeah, and the last one is release often. You really need to periodically release new builds to your users. Either you have new features or bug fixes, timely delivery to those users is quite critical. Okay, so here is the summary. We talk about what is a language server and why it is quite useful for VSCode. And we also go over the steps to create a new language server. And now we will begin the Q&A session, and I will try to answer the questions you posted. And then, yeah, if you have further questions that I cannot answer in a short period of time, you can actually write to me. And if you also have business inquiry to build your own custom language server, you can also send to the mailbox. Okay, let me open the session and we see the questions. Okay, the very first question we got is, if I want to modify an existing language, such as C, where do I find the existing C language server? That's actually a good question. So you actually have several options. If we go to Marketplace, we actually can see a lot of existing C extensions for VSCode users. I just demonstrated Microsoft's C and C++ extension, but there are other options, either Clone, which is part of the LLVM project. They have a dedicated extension and its language server called CloneD. So you can actually see into the source code of either Microsoft's extension or the Clone extension and modify them if you want some new features. Yeah, of course you can start your own language server, follow the sample I provided, but it's actually quite simple, not feature complete. So yeah, I suggest that you modify Microsoft or the Clone one. That will be more suitable in in the case. Okay, the second question we have here is there any way to make Visual Studio Code modify a code file before writing it to disk? In other words, how can I run a post-processing task on some code and have the output saved to the file? Yeah, that's also a good question. I can think of one case, that is when I finish writing a few lines of code and the indentation doesn't look good. Maybe before saving that changes to the disk, there can be something like code formatter that will beautify the code, and then whatever we save to the disk will look quite beautiful. That's actually possible. Visual Studio Code actually have the certain events, like I mentioned, file modified or file saved. You just need to trigger the custom code between the event of file modified and file saved. Just let it happen in between. And then you can actually modify the content within VS Code, yeah, just in the way you like. So that's something you can do in a language extension, yeah. The next question is, can a language server be written in Python, not for Python itself? Yeah, of course. We know that for the Python community, they actually have many languages. Python itself is for scripting and coding. It also has a language called restructured text for documentation. It also have other things like the notebook. So you can build a language server for example, restructured text in Python. That's okay. And for me, I actually write a restructured text language server in C#. So yeah, you can actually use Python as a powerful language to build quite a lot of language servers, not only for Python itself. The next question is regarding of the 4003 extension in the VS Code marketplace. Which are your favorites? Okay, I think for my case, I use the Python extension from Microsoft quite often, as well as the C# and C++ extension, because that are the three primary programming language I use for either my own project or my customer's project. So yeah, those are my favorites. Yeah, there are actually other extensions that I use quite often, such as ESLint, which is a linter extension. It sits behind the scene and always scan your JavaScript source file and tell you what lines doesn't look that good. Maybe you can change it a little bit better. Yeah. So this kind of tools are quite useful for daily usage, which are my favorites. Okay, so that's all the questions so far, and I hope that you see my answer actually helps. Yeah, while we're waiting for more questions, you can actually try to fill in the survey for this session. Go to the survey link, Aka Microsoft Reactor Survey, and you can leave the feedback about this session, so we can try to improve it. Yeah. Thank you.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Lex. I mean, if anyone has any more questions in the next minute or two, Lex can answer those. But if not, then thank you so much for joining us. Oh, I think we just got one more question, Lex. Here, I'll just publish that for you.
Okay, thank you. So we got another question. If you are using Microsoft Python extension, can you also, I guess you mean, can you also use additional extensions for Python? Yeah, actually, extension of VS Code can run simultaneously, side by side. So, for example, I have a complex Python project. Then it will consist of both Python source files as well as documentation files like restructured text, some XML files, JSON files. And when you open that project in VS Code, actually there can be many extensions running in the background, many language servers. You will have the Python language server, XML language server, JSON language server, as well as restructured language server. So yeah, that's quite typical a setup for Python users. But you also need to pay attention to potential conflicts because most of the language extensions, they hook to different events, but if they happen to hook to the same event and respond to the same thing, they might be potential issues, but really rare based on my personal experience. Yeah. Of course, for every extension published on VS Code Marketplace, you can easily find the link to their GitHub repository where you can report this kind of issues. And you can also suggest new features. And most of the developers are quite responsive. Yeah. Okay, we seem to have another question. Oh, I think that's all. Okay. Yeah.
Well, great. I think since we're just a couple minutes over time now, I think Lex, that was awesome. Thank you so much for doing this. I think you shared some of the links to your personal accounts as well. So if anyone has following questions, they can reach out to you there. And if you'd like links to anything, you can reach out to any of the links that are on the screen now, and we'll get you in touch with Lex as well. And then the recording will be available on our YouTube channel in a couple of days, so you can follow along from everything that Lex just presented today. But thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you guys. Bye.